So it's Joseph here again, ready to make another video. And it's a cold winter day here in the Rio Grande Valley. It's down to, I think, 30 degrees. So it's pretty cold for us here in South Texas. I mean, not compared to other parts of the country, but it's a cold one. So I thought it'd be a good day to make another video. And today I'm going to take part in Steve Carlson's Vinyl Tag World Music Vinyl Tag 2025. And it looks like a lot of fun. I've seen a couple of people get involved with it, and I thought, why not join into this one? It's a way to dig into my nooks and crannies of my collection, some things that maybe I have not listened to in a while. And so it's got 15 prompts, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, number one is a reggae album or album influenced by a reggae artist. I'm not a real big fan of reggae music, but I did find this reggae album several years ago in a thrift store, and it's called Time is the Master by John Holt. I had never heard of him before, but apparently he's a well-regarded reggae vocalist. Apparently he was a member of the Paragons, which is a famous reggae group. And this is a really outstanding album. It's kind of a smooth sounding reggae sound, sometimes orchestrated with horns and a little touch of strings. But the title track is really outstanding. Time is the Master, John Holt. Number two, album or song sung in a different language. For this one, I went with the French artist François Hardy, the Yeah Yeah Girl from Paris. And I came across this one in a very great way. I found 5 of her albums in a local thrift store, and they were all in excellent condition, early pressings. And I had never heard of Francois Hardy, the French vocalist. But luckily for YouTube, I checked her out real quick and found out what a wonderful early pop French sound she has. And what a great way to get 5 of her albums just right off the bat for 99 cents each. And I really enjoy her music. Francois Hardy, the Yeah Yeah Girl from Paris. Number 3, album or song with a tribal beat. Right away when I heard this prompt, I thought of this band, Osabisa, their self-titled album. They're a band from Africa. Of course, this cover, you might recognize the artwork. It's from Roger Dean, who did many of the Yes albums and some other famous album artwork. But this is really a wonderful African band. They have elements of jazz, rock, of course, African beats. And it's led by Teddy Osai, who tenor sax, who just recently passed away just a couple of days ago. I think he was already in his late 80s. But a beautiful, beautiful sound, great rhythms. I really enjoy the trumpet work of Mac Tonto, the late trumpeter. Really lyrical, jazzy sound, somewhat like Hugh Masekela, but Osabisa from Africa. Next up, an album from the Far East. I went with Paul Horn Inside. Of course, he's not an Eastern artist. He's an American jazz musician. But at this time, I think this was the early 70s, he started going around the world different locations and making recordings primarily on his flute. And in this case, Paul Horn Inside, he visited the Taj Mahal and he was enchanted with the sound of the echoes in those big parts of the building. And he recorded this one, Paul Horn Inside. To be truthful, I have to check this one out a little more. It's just solo flute, so it's reflective, meditative music. But Paul Horn Inside the Taj Mahal. And next up, album that uses a sitar. I went with Boogie with the Canned Heat. Now, right away, when you think of sitar, you don't think of Canned Heat because they're a boogie blues band. Of course, they were very popular in the 60s with Bob the Bear Height and, of course, the late, great Alan Wilson. But on their big hit, On the Road Again, that was their first, I believe, their first big hit, and it was written by Alan Wilson, sung by Alan Wilson. But it has a great sitar intro that really, and then it kind of has that sitar sound throughout parts of the song. But a great intro, a great use of sitar, Boogie with the Canned Heat, and the late, great Alan Wilson. Next album from Scandinavia, and I went with this artist. I actually could have used this in another category because his name is a little hard to pronounce when you first see it. I think it's say Terji Ripdahl or Terj Ripdahl. That's the way I've said it. And it's this album called Waves. This is on the ECM label. Terji or Terj is a Norwegian. I believe he's from Norway, guitarist, and he recorded many albums on ECM. He's a wonderful guitarist. He includes elements of rock, jazz, classical, and they call him the tone poet on the Stratocaster because he has such a fluid sound. And Terj Ripdahl, I actually have quite a few of his albums on the ECM label. Terj Ripdahl from Norway. Next up, an album from or influenced by Africa. And I went with, this was an easy one, Hugh Masekela, the great late trumpet player from South Africa, who had, of course, he had his big hit, Grazing in the Grass, that brought that African sound first to the United States. But on this one, it's the Americanization of Ooga Booga. It's on the MGM Records label. And this is one of his great early albums recorded live at the Village Gate. I always have enjoyed the sound of Hugh's trumpet. It's got a funky, lyrical sound that really, when you hear his trumpet, you know it's Hugh. And of course, Grazing in the Grass has always been one of my favorite songs. It's not on this album, but this album includes a great version of Cantaloupe Island. Hugh Masekela, the Americanization of Ooga Booga. Album from Australia. This was a tough one because I don't have any albums by artists from Australia. One of my favorite bands from Australia is Men at Work, and I don't have that album. And I didn't have any albums from people from Australia. So I had to go in that general area of the world, and I went to New Zealand. And I went with Alan Broadbent and Putter Smith. Alan Broadbent is probably not familiar to most of you. He's a pianist from New Zealand, and he came to the United States in the late 60s, early 1970s to study at the Berklee School of Music. He joined the Woody Herman Band, became one of their primary arrangers, of course playing piano. Later he moved to Los Angeles. He became quite an arranger in town, and lately I think he's been focusing more on piano. He's a wonderful piano player, kind of Bill Evans, Lenny Tristano influenced. And here he's joined by Putter Smith, who is the bass playing brother of Carson Smith, who of course was on many of those Chet Baker albums in the 50s. But this is Alan Broadbent from New Zealand, not Australia, and Putter Smith. Great album. Album from South America or music inspired by the continent. This one I went with Argentinian saxophone player from Argentina, Gato Barberi, and he made a series of albums in the 70s called Latin America, chapters 1, 2, 3. I think he went all the way to 4. And this is chapter 2, Hasta Siempre. And this is recorded in Argentina. There's a couple of tracks cut in Brazil and some in the United States. But I really have always loved the sound of Gato's tenor sax. It's got that grittiness and harshness of almost Pharoah Sanders, but it's got a Latin groove to it. And he incorporates many Latin style melodies throughout his solos. But this is Gato Barberi, chapter 2. Next up, music from an island nation besides the UK. This was in a recent pickup in a thrift store here in the Rio Grande Valley, and this is called Cuban Carnival, and it's on the Judson label. What kind of caught my attention about this one is this is an offshoot of Riverside. It's produced by Bill Grauer, and it's called Cuban Carnival, and it's authentic music from Cuba. It's got some great trumpet, great flute work, and of course great percussion. I'm not familiar with any of the artists on here, but it's just a wonderful sounding album. Great front album, some artwork there on the front. But I wish it was in better shape. It's pretty rough. It's got quite a few scratches and stuff, but it's definitely worth a spin to hear some of that authentic music from the island of Cuba. Next up is music from or inspired by the Middle East. It includes Turkey and Iran. And this one, I went with Duke Ellington, the Far East Suite. And it says Far East Suite, but this is music that Duke went on tour in these Far East countries, but also in the Middle East. And he was inspired by the countries that he visited and wrote compositions that kind of reflect, not necessarily maybe the sound of that country, but more the feel or the vibe. And it's one of Duke's better suites. Duke was famous for writing different suites, and this is called the Far East Suite. And I think it's one of his better ones. It's one of my favorite Duke Ellington albums also. So this is Duke Ellington's Far East Suite, but representing the Middle East. Music from a very cold country. I went with Canada and Canada's Guess Who, the best of the Guess Who. This is a wonderful greatest hits album, best of album. Of course, it's got the great vocals and songs of Burton Cummings. And it's one of my favorite best of albums because every single song is just a winner. The best of the Guess Who from Canada. Next up, a garage rock album from a different country. This is the best of Eric Burdon and the Animals, and they really probably cannot be considered a garage rock band, but on this one, they have some of their not most famous hits, but they have somewhat kind of a garage rock sound, very gritty, very bluesy. And of course, Eric Burdon was such a wonderful vocalist, still with us today. And this one includes A Girl Named Zandos, which kind of has a psychedelic feel, CC Rider, some blues rock. But the best of Eric Burdon and the Animals, Volume 2. Getting toward the end of this, and favorite album from another country, excluding US, UK, and Canada. This was a recent pickup of mine. Gal Costa, the famous Brazilian singer who recently passed away about a year or two ago. And she is one of my favorite Brazilian singers. This is a compilation, and it includes one of my favorite songs by her, Falsa Baiana. Such a wonderful, smooth-sounding vocalist. Sometimes her tone with the lack of vibrato almost reminds me of Miles Davis on her slow songs. And that is perhaps my most favorite song by her, the Falsa Baiana, Gal Costa. And last but not least, the final one is album title or group whose name is hard to pronounce. And whenever you see this guy's album, his name, Gabor Szabo, High Contrast, that's the name of this album, you kind of wondered, is it Gabor Szabo? Sometimes they actually spell his last name with a G, G-Z-A-Bo. But anyways, I say Gabor Szabo. He was a Hungarian guitar player. He had a big influence on Carlos Santana. And this album is really a great album. Here he's accompanied by soul singer Bobby Womack on rhythm guitar, and it includes the original rendition of Breezin', which would be made famous by George Benson. But I actually prefer Gabor's and Bobby's version. It's very soulful and great feel on Breezin'. Gabor Szabo, High Contrast. Well, that was 15 different albums from different parts of the world. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed digging into my collection, checking these out. And that's all for now. Like, subscribe.